Not all women abandoned need a lovesick second male lead to redeem them. When I heard Steven Shen say, "The thought of Alice's hands touching so much blood just makes me disgusted," I knew he had fallen for the new female intern at the company. I calmly handed him the divorce papers because my life never revolved solely around him. But later, unable to find me, Steven went mad. Chapter 1. I'm a bit tired today. Not in the mood, Steven said as he pulled his hand away from mine and turned his back to me. Today was my ovulation period. The day we planned to conceive, but now he was refusing me. Maybe feeling his actions were a bit much. Steven turned around and held me in his arms, kissing my forehead. Be good. Sleep. Hearing his even breathing, I knew there was a problem between us. So the next day, I left work early from the hospital, set up a romantic candlelight dinner, and planned to surprise Steven. But just before entering, I overheard his conversation with his good friend, Ivan Liu. I used to really love Alice. Couldn't get enough of her. But now, just thinking about her hands touching so much blood makes me disgusted. Basically, you're just tired of her, Ivan said casually. Steven didn't deny it. Have you gotten involved with that little secretary? Her name is Joanna, right? Steven didn't speak this time, remaining silent for a long while. No way. You're serious? Steven finally spoke softly. Almost. I'd advise you to be careful. We all saw how much you loved Alice before. You were willing to die for her. Don't go too far and end up burning your bridges. No one can help you then. Steven seemed to snicker. Do you think she'd give up 10 years of her youth? Chapter 2. Steven's words made me feel as if I had fallen into an ice pit. Cold all over, thinking about his continuous rejections these days. It turns out he wasn't really tired. He just found me disgusting? These two words pierced my heart like needles, making it hard to breathe. He knew how precious 10 years of a woman's youth were, yet he used it as a weapon to hurt me. I did have an impression of the name Joanna. She was a new intern hired by Steven's company. I still remember when Steven first mentioned her. His eyes were filled with undisguised admiration. He told me Joanna had lost to other candidates in the interview, but this girl was relentless, constantly begging the interviewer for another chance. Almost crying and kneeling. This kind of perseverance was rare among young people nowadays. In the end, seeing her pitiable state, Steven eliminated a more qualified candidate and hired her against the rules. At that time, I couldn't help but frown. Isn't this emotional blackmail? Interviews should be judged based on ability, not on who seems pitiful. This is unfair to other candidates. Steven uncharacteristically scowled at me. How did you become so heartless as a doctor? Have I protected you too well? I didn't doubt myself because of his accusations and continued to argue with him. Because of this, we gave each other the cold shoulder for a night. Steven later humbled himself to reconcile with me, and we made up. But I remembered the name. I didn't expect she would become Steven's personal secretary. It was from that time that Steven stopped sharing company matters with me. People have a desire to share. If they're not sharing with you, they're sharing with someone else. Turns out, all changes have traces. Translation to English. Chapter 3. At night, I lay down early, feeling the mattress sink behind me. A man's cold hand wrapped around my waist. I fought the urge to vomit, grabbing Steven's hand as it reached for the hem of my clothes. I don't feel well, I said coldly. Steven paused. I could feel his interest, knowing it would be hard for him to hold back. But he didn't force me. Instead, he thoughtfully covered me with the blanket and went to the bathroom to take care of himself. He took his phone with him, as he always did whenever he went to the bathroom. A moment later, I received a friend request on my phone, and to my surprise, the profile picture was Joanna's. Taking a deep breath, I accepted the request. Almost immediately, a screenshot was sent. It was a chat log between her and Steven, timestamped from when he had just gone into the bathroom. Joanna had sent Steven the name of a hotel and a room number. She told him, "I don't expect you to get a divorce. I just want to give my first time to the man I love most. If you don't come, I'll find someone else. It doesn't matter who. As long as it's not you. Don't regret it." Steven replied with just 2 words, "Wait for me." Just as I finished reading, Steven came out of the bathroom. "Honey, There's an urgent issue at the office that I need to handle. He used to use this excuse often to go out in the middle of the night. And because I trusted him, I never questioned it. Thinking back now, was it always to meet Joanna? I'll go with you. Steven hesitated, then smiled gently, patting my head. Aren't you feeling unwell? Don't push yourself. I'd feel bad if you got sick. Don't worry. I'll be back soon. Without waiting for my response, he turned and left. I followed him in my car, trailing him quietly. Steven drove fast, and several times I almost lost him. Joanna was waiting for him at the hotel entrance. As soon as they saw each other, they embraced and kissed, like lovers who had been holding back for a long time. Chapter 4. Suppressing the bitterness in my heart. I took out my phone to take pictures. I even recorded a short video of about 10 seconds. I watched them walk into the hotel with my own eyes. After calming down in the car for a while, I called my former graduate advisor, Professor Lee. He was abroad, and it was morning there. The call connected. Professor, do you still need people for your project abroad? Professor Lee paused for a moment, then spoke with surprise and delight. You've made up your mind? If it's you, we always need more people. When I graduated from graduate school, Professor Lee wanted me to follow him abroad for a project. It was a rare opportunity for me, but for Steven, I chose to stay. Over the years, Professor Lee never stopped trying to persuade me, but I always refused. In truth, I wanted to go. Now, I can finally do so without any worries. I don't regret my past choices. Back then, Alice wanted to pursue love. Now, Alice is determined to fulfill her dreams. Both decisions were made by following my heart. Chapter 5. In the end, Professor Lee and I agreed that I would go in about a month. Returning home, I took out the wine from the cabinet and began to drink glass after glass. In a month, I could leave completely. My best friend Zoe sent me a message on WeChat. How did it go? Romantic candlelight dinner, right? I told you, Steven loves you so much. Just a little effort and you'll win him over. Everyone said Steven loved me, and I used to think so too. It turns out a man pretending to love can fool everyone. Looking at the ring on my ring finger, I gave a bitter smile. Steven bought it for me after delivering food for 3 months. At that time, he and his friends had just started a business, and all their money was invested in the new company to buy me a decent ring. He worked at the company during the day and delivered food at night. He slept less than 3 hours a day. Once, he was so tired that he dozed off while riding his electric scooter, falling on the road along with the scooter. Luckily, a passing car stopped in time. Otherwise, the consequences would have been unimaginable. When I arrived at the hospital, his hands and feet were covered in blood, and his clothes were stained red. When he saw me, Steven immediately hid his injured hand behind him. With tears in my eyes, I asked him why he did all this. He clumsily wiped away my tears. Silly girl. Of course. I wanted to marry you as soon as possible. What if such a beautiful girl gets taken away? Now that you're mine, I can't bear to let you go. Later, we made a lot of money and became financially stable, but I always wore that ring. Steven offered to get me a bigger diamond ring, but I refused. To me, it was more precious than any diamond ring. Remembering how nervous Steven was when he proposed, I took off the ring and placed it on the dining table. His words from that time still echoed in my ears. But the person is no longer the same. I don't need this ring anymore. Chapter 6. In the middle of the night, Steven sent a message. Honey, the issue at work is quite complicated. I might not be able to come back tonight. You don't have to wait for me. Get some rest. I'm with Ivan. It seemed he had already coordinated with Ivan. They were indeed good friends. I didn't reply. Having drunk too much, I fell asleep on the sofa. In my dream, I saw Steven for the first time. At that time, we were both freshmen in college. During military training, the first thing Steven said to me was, "Hey, you're really pretty." Such a corny pickup line. Because of that line, his roommates teased him for a whole year. Afterward, he frequently chatted with me on WeChat. Even though we weren't in the same major, I often ran into him on campus. Many people pursued me in college, and initially, I had no particular feelings for him, but I was gradually moved by his sincerity and enthusiasm. After we got together, Steven treated me with utmost care. Everyone around us envied me for having such a considerate boyfriend. We went from undergraduate to graduate school together. After I graduated with my master's degree, Steven proposed to me. I accepted without hesitation. Steven hugged me tightly. His eyes reddened with joy, choking out, "Ollie, trust me, I will give you a good life. I won't let you down." Now, I have lost completely, but I can only accept the consequences of my choices. Chapter 7. The next day, I was awakened by my phone's alarm, and my pillow was wet with tears. Steven didn't come back the whole night. I told myself this was the last time I would cry for him. Then I got up, washed my face in the bathroom, and prepared to go to work. Although I had decided to resign, I had clinic duties today and medical reports to write, so I couldn't take leave. In the adult world, no matter how sad you are, you can't forget your work. Before going to work, I called a lawyer friend to consult about divorce procedures. No melodramatic entanglements or complaints. I didn't need some lovesick second male lead to suddenly appear and redeem me, to slap Steven in the face. My life has never been just about Steven. I have my own path. Divorce is the only conclusion I can think of for the two of us. In the morning, I submitted my resignation letter and went to work. The workload was heavy, and being busy helped me temporarily forget about Steven. But unexpectedly, before I could look for Steven, he came to the hospital himself. I was preparing to take some documents to the patient's family in the ward when I saw a familiar figure not far away. It was Steven, holding the hand of a tear-streaked Joanna tightly. They hurried to the cardiology department. The ward they headed to was the one I needed to visit. It turned out Joanna's mother was ill. Seeing her mother's haggard face, Joanna cried so much she could barely stand by the bedside. Steven gently patted her and comforted her tenderly. Mrs. Shen expressed that she had no regrets in her life but was worried about leaving her daughter to suffer alone without anyone to take care of her. I couldn't help but raise an eyebrow because the patient I was looking for was Mrs. Shen. In my impression, her condition wasn't that severe. Upon hearing this, Joanna immediately told her mother she had a boyfriend and not to worry. When Mrs. Shen asked who it was, Joanna turned to Steven with a pleading look. Steven then put his arm around Joanna's waist, his expression natural. Auntie, I am Anna's boyfriend. Please rest and recover. I will take care of Anna for you. After saying that, he gave Joanna a doting look. Mrs. Shen still didn't believe it and insisted they kiss in front of her to be assured. This time, Steven looked troubled and couldn't help but look around. Joanna tugged at his clothes with a pleading face. In the end, Steven couldn't refuse and leaned down to kiss her. Chapter 8. Expressionless. I walked into the ward, taking pictures with my phone as well. Since I had decided to divorce, having more evidence on my phone would be helpful. Steven saw me and immediately pushed Joanna away. His face turned pale, eyes filled with unprecedented unease and fear. Ollie? Joanna, who had been looking somewhat resentful, also turned pale upon hearing my name. She looked at me in terror. They were both afraid I would cause a scene in public. But I simply said calmly, "The family of the patient in bed 03. Please come and sign the documents." After saying this, I turned and left the ward. Steven and Joanna followed closely behind. I handed the documents to Joanna to fill out. Your mother only has a blocked blood vessel. She will undergo a stent insertion surgery tomorrow. Normally, she can be discharged 3 days post-operation. This was already explained to her yesterday. Upon hearing this, Joanna's hand trembled while holding the pen, and she looked guiltily at Steven. Steven pursed his lips. Why are you at this hospital? I transferred here a year ago. Steven choked, unable to say anything else. A wife had changed jobs over a year ago, and the husband didn't know, an indication of his neglect. Joanna handed me the completed forms, and when I saw the address on them, I paused. The address she filled in was for the first house Steven and I lived in together. At that time, Steven bought it in my name. He told me, "This place holds all our beautiful memories, and from now on, you are the sole owner of this house. No other woman has the right to enter without your consent." Steven seemed to realize this too and was about to explain. But Joanna spoke first. Sister Ollie, I'm sorry. My landlord suddenly decided to sell the house and kicked me out. Brother Steven couldn't bear to see me homeless, so he gave me the keys to the house. Don't blame Brother Steven. Blame me. I looked up at Joanna's pitiful gaze. Youth indeed can evoke sympathy. How long have you been living there? Joanna was stunned, seemingly not expecting me to be so calm. 2 months. Very well. Miss Shen, you should know the house is solely in my name. The rent, according to the current market rate, is $8,000 a month. Please transfer this amount to me in the next couple of days. Also, I'm planning to sell the house soon, so please move out as soon as possible. Chapter 9. Joanna looked at Steven with grievance, only to find that Steven was staring intently at me. Of course, if Miss Shen has no money, she can find someone else to pay me. As long as I get the money, I don't care where it comes from. Steven frowned and gritted his teeth. Alice, is this necessary? It really isn't. So when you have time, we can discuss the divorce. Hearing the word divorce, I clearly saw joy flash across Joanna's face. Steven's expression darkened. Do you have to go this far? I was just helping, and it was just a kiss. Do you have to make such a big deal out of it? Is that so? Then can I also help others by casually kissing another man? How dare you? Ha, you're really someone who likes to play double standards. I sneered. It seems Mr. Fu didn't have enough fun at the hotel last night. No worries. I'll move out today so you can play at home. Steven was stunned, his voice a bit hoarse. You know everything? I didn't answer. I'll have the lawyer draft the divorce papers and bring them to you soon. As I prepared to leave, Steven grabbed my hand. It was only then that he noticed I wasn't wearing my wedding ring. Alice, are you serious? I pulled my hand away and left, not intending to argue with him in the hospital. We had nothing left to discuss other than the divorce. Behind me, I heard Steven's frustrated voice. Alice, you'll regret this. I won't humble myself to beg you again this time. There are plenty of women who want the position of Mrs. Fu. It turns out that when a person is utterly speechless, they really want to laugh. Even though he was the one who cheated, he could so righteously question me. I don't know where he got the nerve. Chapter 10. In the evening, my close colleagues held a farewell party for me at a KTV. Everyone was reluctant to see me go but genuinely happy for my better prospects. When I returned from the bathroom, I saw Steven in the neighboring private room with a few friends. From their conversation, it seemed they were talking about me. Brother Steven, is your wife really going to divorce you this time? I'd say she's been spoiled. My wife also made a fuss before, but now she's well behaved. Women can't be spoiled. If it were me, I'd leave her be. If she wants a divorce, let her. There's still a 30-day cooling off period. Once she realizes we're not dependent on her, she'll be scared. You guys can't compare to Brother Steven. He's famous for being a wife-doting maniac. I knew all their wives. Some were using their husbands' money to secretly support younger men. Others stayed for the sake of the children, treating their husbands as long-term meal tickets. These days, no woman is foolish enough to sacrifice for a scumbag without getting something in return. Steven was drinking silently, and when everyone was cautiously observing his expression, he suddenly said, "After all these years, it's time to teach her a lesson." Upon hearing Steven's words, the atmosphere in the room became lively again. Sister-in-law, what are you doing here? Are you here to find Brother Steven? Come on in. Brother Steven is inside. Before I could react, Steven's friend pushed me into the private room. Chapter 11. When Steven saw me, his expression instantly relaxed, and the hand gripping his wine glass slowly loosened. But he still kept a stern face and didn't look at me. It was then that I noticed all the other men had 1 or 2 female companions drinking with them. Except Steven. Ivan immediately clarified. Sister-in-law, don't misunderstand. These companions are ours. They have nothing to do with Brother Steven. Sister-in-law, please sit. Who else would dare sit next to Brother Steven besides you? I didn't notice when, but Steven had already moved his coat away, leaving an open seat for me. Ivan began to clear the room, calling out the female companions. I hurried to stop him. No need. I'm here with my colleagues and need to go back. Besides, Steven and I are getting a divorce. These things have nothing to do with me. Before I could finish, Steven interrupted me, as if he really didn't want to hear the word divorce. Alice, have you had enough fun? Even jokes should have limits. I looked straight at Steven. I'm not joking. Do you remember what I said the first time you got drunk at a KTV? I meant it. Steven's face changed when he heard that, obviously remembering as well. At that time, Steven had gotten drunk and almost kissed another girl, mistaking her for me, until I arrived just in time. Back then, I told Steven, if you get dirty, I won't want you anymore. Just as I reached the door, I heard the sound of a glass shattering behind me. Steven had smashed his wine glass. Alice, you want a divorce, right? Fine. Let's meet at the Civil Affairs office tomorrow. All right. That's exactly what I wanted. Chapter 12. After the gathering, I returned to Steven's house to pack my things. I had already asked Zoe to help me rent a place near her house. I wouldn't be staying long anyway. As I was leaving with my suitcase, I happened to see Joanna bringing a drunken Steven back. Our eyes met, and there was a look of triumph on Joanna's face. She placed Steven on the sofa. Just as she was about to get up, Steven pulled her into his arms. Honey, I feel terrible. Hold me. The more Joanna struggled, the tighter Steven held her. Honey, don't leave me. Joanna glanced at me, her face turning red with embarrassment. Mr. Fu, please let go of me. Don't do this. There are others here. I had no interest in watching them flirt any longer and left with my suitcase. The next day, I went with a lawyer to finalize the divorce with Steven. The property was divided equally, and the process went smoothly. As we exited, Steven spoke. Alice, do you feel defeated now? Did you think I'd beg you like before? There's a limit to anyone's patience. I hope you know I won't always tolerate your nonsense. I didn't respond, just looked at the divorce papers in my hand and slightly smiled. In 30 days, Steven and I would be completely unrelated. Steven frowned. I'll find another place for Joanna to stay in the next couple of days. I'll have my assistant transfer the rent to you. I nodded. All right. I've already packed your things. The rest you can throw away. Don't forget to come back in 30 days. I turned to leave. Steven suddenly spoke. Yesterday, it wasn't me who called Joanna to pick me up. I was drunk, and she happened to call. The waiter heard it and called her over. Steven, you don't need to explain this much to me. It's your business. Steven's face turned even darker. Chapter 13. The next day, I boarded a plane to S-City. Professor Lee had a 5-day academic forum in S-City that he couldn't attend himself, so he asked me to go in his place, since I wanted to get away and relax. I agreed. During those 5 days, I learned a lot and met many renowned figures in the industry. It was a fulfilling experience, and I didn't think about Steven even once. See, love isn't that important to a person after all. There are many more meaningful things in life waiting for me to do. The day after I returned, I went to work at the hospital. As soon as I finished work, I saw Steven standing not far away. He was leaning against a black Maybach, holding a cigarette, his clothes disheveled and his face haggard. A male colleague who finished work with me leaned in and whispered, "That guy has been waiting here for several days. I heard he asked the security guard about you. When he found out you weren't working, he waited outside every day." He looked at me with concern, asking if I needed help. I shook my head and said no, just as Steven started walking toward me. As he got closer, I saw his eyes were bloodshot, a sign he hadn't slept for days. He had stubble on his face, something almost impossible for someone with his slight OCD. "Dr. Jiang, you're really impressive. Finding your next target so quickly. Just wonder how the person would react knowing you have a husband of 10 years? Steven, maybe 10 years is a long time for you, but for me, 10 years is nothing." Not getting the response he wanted, Steven seemed to break down a bit. "Alice, do you think disappearing for a few days would make me worry and go crazy for you? Too bad for you. I didn't call you once. You can ask your friends. I didn't even ask them where you went. Then why are you here now?" Chapter 14. Steven was stumped by my question, seemingly unsure why he came here himself. After a while, he finally spoke. You changed the locks on that house. I couldn't get in. Steven was referring to the house where Joanna had been staying. It seemed Steven had gone there in the past few days. I nodded. Yes. That's my house. I'm planning to sell it. I changed the locks to prevent unrelated people from entering. Steven couldn't believe it. You're really going to sell it? Can you bear to part with it? What's there to be unwilling about? It's useless to keep it. The real estate agent will bring people to see the house in a few days. If you still have things to take, you can go then. When I said it was useless, Steven's eyes instantly turned red, a hurt expression flashing across his face. In the past, whenever Steven and I fought, as soon as he showed that look, my anger would vanish, and I'd laugh and go comfort him. But now, things have changed. He's no longer the Steven who would give everything for me, and I'm no longer the Alice who wholeheartedly believed in him. His tears could be for me or for another woman. I turned to leave, and Steven, seemingly not wanting me to go, hurriedly said, "One more thing. I don't have time to pick up the divorce certificate later. We need to reschedule." Finally seeing an expression other than indifference on my face, Steven smiled with satisfaction. "Steven, don't joke like that. No matter what, you must show up at the Civil Affairs office. I don't have time to waste with you. After all, I had already promised Professor Lee that I'd go abroad as soon as I got the divorce certificate in a month. I don't want us to end up having to go through a lawsuit." Steven's smile froze. "Do you really want to divorce that badly? Isn't that what you want too?" This way, he could openly be with Joanna. Steven didn't deny it. "We'll see when the time comes. Anyway, I'm not sure about my schedule." Looking satisfied with my angry expression, Steven drove away. Chapter 15. Back home, I took 2 bottles of wine to Zoe's place. "Steven is such a bastard." Zoe slammed her glass down, cursing Steven with an angry face. "If I had known he was this kind of person, I wouldn't have helped him when he proposed to you." I poured more wine into our glasses, shaking my head with a smile. Who can predict the future? No matter how passionately love begins, in the end, it depends on one's conscience. I'm just grateful that I discovered this not too late, and everything is still manageable. I heard that during the 5 days you were gone, Steven didn't even go to the company. He left everything to Ivan and squatted at the hospital entrance every day waiting for you. If he acted like this after you disappeared for 5 days, what will happen if you really go abroad? Won't he go mad? Zoe's tone carried a hint of schadenfreude, but I didn't care at all about how Steven would handle my departure. Right now, all I can think about is how to help Professor Lee with his experiments once I go abroad and worrying that Steven might stand me up on the day we get the divorce certificate. Everything else is not within my consideration. Zoe raised her glass to clink with mine. All right. Our sister Jiang is all about her career. I love it. The next day, after waking up from our drunkenness, I received a call from the real estate agent. He told me they had found a buyer for the house. Someone who paid the full price without haggling. I was very pleased. Finally some good news, and asked the agent to help expedite the transfer process. In the following days, I was busy with hospital handovers and preparing for my trip abroad. Steven occasionally called me. He asked about trivial things like where his clothes and ties were. After a while, I just stopped answering his calls. If it weren't for the need to get the divorce certificate, I would have blocked him immediately. Later, Ivan came to see me, telling me that Steven had fired Joanna. He also mentioned that Steven wasn't in a good state recently. He got drunk and got into a fight with someone the other day. I really had no good feelings towards this brother of his, so I coldly replied, "If he's injured, he should go to the hospital. Telling me is useless." I understood his intention, which was to plead for Steven, but the root of the problem was never Joanna. The mistress is certainly disgraceful and deserves to be despised by everyone. But the man who cheated is the true source of the evil. Without Joanna, there would still be other mistresses. Once a man has a taste of infidelity, it's not easy to give it up, and I have no interest in being a resentful woman. Chapter 16. The day before getting the divorce certificate arrived in no time. I was at home packing my luggage, debating whether to call Steven to remind him. Unexpectedly, while I was still deliberating, Steven showed up at my door. He appeared furious and looked at me with a menacing expression. Did you send the photos of me cheating to my dad? I was baffled. What? Don't play dumb. If you hadn't told my dad about my affair, would he have had a heart attack at home? If it weren't for Anna finding him in time, the consequences would have been unimaginable. It was only then that I understood what Steven was talking about, and my face darkened. I had considered asking Steven's father to help persuade him, but because Mr. Fu had a heart condition, I quickly dismissed the idea for fear of causing him stress. Steven, if you're brainless, you should go to the hospital. I'm a cardiologist. Do you think I would joke about a patient's life? Before I finished speaking, Steven's fist slammed into the wall behind me. His eyes were filled with pain. Alice, you've disappointed me so much this time. I can't believe you're this kind of person. Isn't divorce what you wanted? I'll grant you that. I'll be there on time tomorrow. Watching Steven's departing figure, any desire I had to explain vanished. He wouldn't listen to anything now. Perhaps it's for the best. If he doesn't believe me, nothing I say will matter. At least this incident ensured he would go to the Civil Affairs Office for the divorce certificate, which is good for me. Chapter 17. When I left the Civil Affairs Office, I felt an unprecedented sense of relief. It was as if a heavy stone had finally been lifted from my heart. In contrast, Steven's brows were furrowed the entire time. He was about to say something when his phone rang. Joanna's anxious voice came through the other end. It seemed something had happened with Mr. Fu. Steven hung up and quickly left. Before getting into the car, he glanced at me with a complicated expression. Alice, think about things carefully. I'll come to talk to you about our situation later. We already had the divorce certificate. There was nothing left to talk about. As I watched Steven drive away, I slowly spoke. Steven, goodbye forever. Chapter 18. In the afternoon, I packed my things and boarded a flight to Germany. In Steven's eyes, it seemed like I was always throwing a tantrum. He never understood me. Once I decide on something, I never look back. Upon landing in Germany, the first thing I did was change my SIM card. Besides my parents and a few close friends, I cut off contact with almost everyone back home. I threw myself entirely into Professor Lee's experiments. 2 years later, today, our team is preparing to return to China with the latest research results. Before returning, I had a phone call with Zoe. Actually, there's something I haven't told you. 6 months after you left, Steven came looking for me. I replied indifferently. So what? That bastard. To find out where you were. He knelt down in the company lobby. It scared me so much I called the police to have him taken away. I raised an eyebrow. Was he that crazy? Hearing about Steven now, I felt very calm, as if I were listening to gossip about a stranger. Yeah, it was crazy. Now he knows regret. But why didn't he think of that earlier? That cheating scumbag. Enough about him. I'm surprised you haven't contacted me all these years. Isn't the best way to forget a relationship to start a new one? I laughed. Such things can't rely on others. They depend on oneself. The most profound lesson Steven taught me was that a man's sincerity is the least reliable thing. In reality, no one can save or heal your pain. The ground I lost, I can only reclaim myself. If you really forget someone by choosing to be with another, it's unfair to the latter. Chapter 19. I knew I would inevitably see Steven when I returned. I didn't plan to deliberately avoid him, but I didn't expect to meet Steven at the first industry cocktail party I attended after returning. Steven stood not far away, his eyes bloodshot as he looked at me, as if he would cry the next second. I intended to ignore him, but he grabbed my wrist and led me outside. In the garden, Steven hugged me and repeatedly said, "I'm sorry." I kept pushing him away. Finally, I couldn't hold back and splashed my red wine on his face. "Are you sober now? If not, I don't mind having the police drag you away." Steven wiped the wine from his face, looking much clearer, yet his expression was even more desolate. "I know everything Joanna did, including the texts she sent you and what happened with my dad. I've driven her out of the city. She'll never be in our lives again. Ollie, I was wrong about everything before, and I regret it deeply." I chuckled. None of that matters to me anymore, because I no longer love him. None of it matters. Tears streamed down Steven's face as he looked at me. Ollie, can you come back to me? I haven't stopped thinking about you for a moment these years. I've always loved you. I looked at him coldly. Steven, don't forget, we are already divorced. No, it's not like that. I never really wanted to divorce you. I just wanted to scare you. In my heart, you will always be my wife. With that, Steven pulled out a necklace from around his neck. It was the wedding ring I had left on the dining table 2 years ago. Only then did I notice that Steven still wore our wedding ring on his ring finger. Honestly, it was quite disgusting. Steven, we ended 2 years ago. I hope you don't continue to pester me. Don't make me despise you. Chapter 20. My words had no effect on Steven. Since he learned where I was, he frequently appeared in my life, claiming he wanted to pursue me again. I managed to win you over in college. I can do it again, Ollie. This time I won't let you go. I was exasperated. Do you think I'd fall into the same trap twice? The first time I could say it was because I was inexperienced. The second time falling into the same trap would be sheer stupidity. But no matter how harsh my words, Steven refused to give up. There was no choice but to treat him as invisible and focus on my work. After all, we were only in China for a few months this time, and every day was busy. In the following days, Professor Lee went to the hospital to perform surgery on a heart disease patient. The patient's family had made an appointment a long time ago to have Professor Lee. Moreover, the case was very special, and Professor Lee asked me to assist him. After 7 hours, from day to night, the surgery was finally successfully completed. As we came out, Professor Lee had just said a few words to the patient's family when chaos erupted in the front. It was rumored that a family member was dissatisfied with the hospital's treatment and had come with a knife to seek revenge. We were preparing to retreat when we saw the family member rushing towards us with a knife. I pushed Professor Lee aside, ready to deliver a flying kick. Suddenly, someone tightly embraced me. It was Steven. I couldn't break free. The next second, the knife plunged straight into Steven's back. Chapter 21. When Steven woke up, it was already noon the next day. Seeing me sitting by his side, he tried to smile reassuringly. Ollie, don't worry. I'm fine. I spoke coldly. Steven, are you an idiot? If it weren't for you, I could have kicked that lunatic away with one kick. These 2 years abroad, besides doing experiments, I spent my other time learning Sanda, a form of martial arts. One reason was for physical fitness. The other was that being abroad wasn't as safe as being home, so it was beneficial for self-defense. Considering the build of that man yesterday, he was no match for me. If it weren't for Steven, I would have subdued him already. Hearing my words, Steven's expression turned desolate again. I was just worried you'd get hurt. Unnecessary. And don't think you can use this injury to ask me to give you another chance. From the moment you said I was disgusting, there was no going back for us. So, if I told you now that I never actually slept with Joanna, you wouldn't believe me, right? Steven laughed self-deprecatingly. I didn't sleep with her at the hotel that time. I stopped at the last moment because I thought of you. I couldn't go through with it. Thinking about it, it's ridiculous. Back then, I didn't explain because I was sulking. I wanted you to lower your head just once, even if it was to say something nice to me. But you never did. Steven took a key out of his wallet. The house you sold 2 years ago. I bought it. I couldn't bear to let someone else buy it. I've been living there these 2 years, filled with all our beautiful memories. Seeing it always made me think of you, as if you had never left. As Steven spoke, he couldn't hold back his tears. This self-pitying drama made me want to laugh. Steven, you are indeed ridiculous. Do you think only having physical relations counts as cheating? I saw you hug and kiss her with my own eyes. You said you thought of me at the last moment, but I don't feel touched, only nauseated. With that, I stood up to leave, but Steven grabbed my sleeve. He choked out, "Is there really no chance for us?" I coldly shook him off. Steven, let's part on good terms. Don't make me regret loving you. I left the room without looking back. Behind me was the sound of a man sobbing uncontrollably. Chapter 22. In the following days, I didn't go back to the hospital to see Steven. He had plenty of people around him. He didn't need my care. Soon, I went abroad again. On the plane, Professor Lee discussed future plans. A few young colleagues complained that they felt like they aged 10 years in 1 year, worrying about losing their hair. Professor Lee sternly reprimanded them. I laughed along from the side, turning to look at the distant scenery. The road ahead would no longer be confined by the limitations before me. I longed for a freer, wider sky.